Starlight Legacy, on the surface, looks like just about every other 16-bit style indie RPG that's trying to mimic the magic we all felt when we played games like Earthbound, Chrono Trigger, Pokemon, or any of the earlier Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy games for the first time. And honestly, if we're going off aesthetics alone and trying to match that style, I'd give it a 10 out of 10 because the pixel art is wonderful, the soundtrack is fantastic, and it even manages to nail that Mode 7 graphical style from that era. But where a lot of other RPGs like this miss the mark is in telling a compelling story and actually being enjoyable to play. Is this one different? Does it succeed at being a standout game? Well, stick around because that's what I'm here to tell you all about. In terms of the story in Starlight Legacy, because the villain of the game is initially unclear, I don't want to dive too much into it as to not spoil some of the twists and turns for you. But the main premise of the game is that you'll play as the 3 Starlight Warriors who are seeking to recover the hidden Starlight relics in order to save the kingdom of Evaria. These 4 relics are each harbored in different provinces, and the entire world is pretty seamlessly interconnected, with the kingdom being smack dab in the middle and serving as your central hub of sorts. What's a bit unique about this is that you can choose to tackle these provinces in any order you please. I'm pretty picky when it comes to stories and games as a whole. I tend to be the type of player that sticks around for the gameplay, and a good story is always just a bonus to me. Starlight Legacy told a story that I thoroughly enjoyed from start to finish, to the extent that I really hope this does well enough to see a sequel. Additionally, talking to the different NPCs in each town was enjoyable because they often harbored funny moments or helpful information. Oftentimes I feel like talking to optional NPCs is a waste of time, but here I talked to everyone I could. The gameplay in this is pretty straightforward. It's a turn-based RPG, so that means that combat is turn-based. You have attacks, magic, and skills you can use. You can also use any of the items from your inventory. It features random battles, with the lone exception being bosses that are always visible, which is a good thing because that means you can always save prior to one of these difficult fights. There's a bunch of different equipment you can apply to your 3 different characters. Each one of them can equip 3 items. There's an accessory and then a left and a right-handed item. You also have your standard potions, antidotes, things that remove debuffs or revive your teammates. There's also throwable items and things like that. You'll also have a key item section of your inventory, which will show the different important items that you're carrying that, you'd never want to sell, that are pretty important to either the story or the gameplay. Now, that leads us to the combat. Now, it's just your run-of-the-mill turn-based combat, but immediately what's a bit unique about it is that it has different interface types that you can apply. Now, by default, there's either a left-handed or right-handed option, and this will make it so that you could just press a button for attack or for magic or for items. And initially I did a few fights like this, but I quickly realized that I much preferred like the Final Fantasy style menus. So the majority of the gameplay you're going to see here is that style. You do have your option here. There's 3 different. There's the left-handed, a right-handed, or the classic option. You're going to be seeing a lot of the classic interface for the gameplay in the combat. Now, I already mentioned that there's magic. Now, the way magic works in this is a lot like Final Fantasy 1, in that you buy spells from a shop, and then you can apply them to your characters. All 3 characters can learn any spell in the game, but the caveat to this is that in combat, only 4 spells will be available to you, so choose wisely. This introduces a level of strategy that is pretty important overall, because sometimes going into boss fights, you won't know what the strengths and weaknesses of the boss are, so you might need to fail once or twice at the boss before you learn what you need to have equipped, and then you can adjust and head back into the fight. 4 spells is a little bit on the low side for my taste. I would have much preferred 8, to be honest. And although the characters can learn a plethora of different spells, you can only use these on the overworld with the exception of the 4 that you have equipped. Those will be the 4 you take into combat. The same goes for the skills. There are a bunch of different skills and your characters will learn these as you level up throughout the game. For these, you can only equip one at a time. So again, you need to choose wisely. I didn't try them all. I kind of had a few that I settled on very early and enjoyed. But having the spells and the skills set up this way does introduce a level of strategy that at the beginning I didn't really like, but I grew to appreciate it. Now, naturally, defeating enemies in this will earn you XP and gold, which is called something else, but you know, it's your money. And that's the main way you're going to become stronger in this. Now, there are no different difficulties in this game, but there are some options that you can toggle on and off even during gameplay that will affect the difficulty a little bit. Now, the first thing in the options that I tweaked, and you probably noticed this, and as a big Final Fantasy VI fan, I was pretty happy I was able to do this, is there's some visual options you can toggle on and off. I made the menus blue because Final Fantasy VI on the Super Nintendo is my all-time favorite RPG from that era. But you also have 2 very important options that I used in different situations. The first is actually an XP multiplier. Now, by default, the game starts at 1.0. If you want to make the game a little harder and grindier, you can lower it to 0.5, but you can also increase it to 1.5 or 2.0. And what this does is this increases or decreases the amount of XP you earn during battles. Now, initially when I started playing this, I played at just the default 1.0, but I quickly learned when I reached the first major boss that I needed to grind a few levels because I wanted to get this review out in a timely fashion on a short deadline. And additionally, I also don't really like grinding. I upped the XP multiplier to 1.5. If you're looking for an experience that is pretty much devoid of grinding, I would suggest that you up this to 1.5. I didn't have to grind at any point after that, but I also wasn't too powerful at the boss fights where I just breezed right through them. So I think that's a happy medium between not grinding and it not being too easy as well. And then additionally, there's an option that I found very beneficial for backtracking that allows you to turn off combat encounters. There's times where genuinely you are constantly running into battles. You're just trying to make progress, but you keep getting hit with these random battles. So the only time I use this, and I highly suggest that if you play this, you probably do the same because you don't want to ruin the game in any way, is that I use this only when backtracking to areas because there is a lot of exploration you can do in this, and there's a lot of incentive for backtracking. Often when you first reach an area, you won't be able to reach a chest or maybe get by a certain obstacle, and you'll acquire abilities throughout the game in the different provinces that will allow you to reach these areas later on. And because I didn't want to constantly be getting in battles when I'm solely trying to backtrack and grab some chests I missed, I would just toggle this on and have on my merry way. The problem with abusing this is that you're going to be heavily underpowered when you reach those boss fights. So I'm going to assume the developer intended this for the way I used it, and honestly, I really like that about it, because if I had to constantly get in battle after battle after battle, when all I'm trying to do is go back and get some chests and explore areas that I couldn't head to previously, that would have been pretty annoying to me. I think we've covered the basics overall pretty well without spoiling anything, but now I do want to mention some of the issues I had with the experience, and I expect that some of these will probably get fixed or patched, but the first thing that kind of annoyed me is your inventory, and your items to be more specific. The only way currently that you can sort your items is one by one. There's no ability to sort by name or item type or anything like that. And when you're in combat and you want to throw an item, for example, your inventory can be an absolute mess. And sorting the items one by one is incredibly tedious. The next is that you have a spell that is called Expose. Basically what this does is it tells you the weakness of your enemy. Now I play on a higher speed setting for the text, and it does not pause the text after Expose gets casted. So it scrolls right on through this. So it makes it pretty much useless to use this spell if you're using a higher text setting, because it just scrolls right through before you can even read it. The next thing is that when you buff your characters in combat, it's really hard to tell if they still have the buff. Like if you increase their magic attack, or their strength, or their defense. You know you casted it on a character, but it's very unclear how long it lasted, or if the effect still persists. And then the next is tied to items. And when you use an item in battle, if your character is frozen in place, for example, and cannot act, you can still choose an action for a character even though they're not going to act, which is a little weird in and of itself. But additionally, if you use an item, it's going to use the inventory of that item, but without actually doing anything. And then again, tied to combat, if you try to heal a character, but they got knocked out before the heal, it'll still try to heal them, but obviously it'll be ineffective, and it wastes that character's turn, instead of just applying the heal to a random character on your party that's still standing. Some of these aspects are a bit archaic and very reminiscent of the original Final Fantasy, but not deal breakers, but minor annoyances that over the course of the 9 to 10 hours I played through this, they got to be annoying and pretty old by the end of it. But overall, Starlight Legacy is one of those games that I can easily recommend, and dare I say that you must play this if you're a fan of the same era of RPGs as I am. It does just about everything really well, and it also doesn't overstay its welcome. It took me between 9 to 10 hours to complete the game, and the older I get, the more I appreciate games that respect the player's time by keeping its content meaningful and not introducing any fluff or filler content that serves no purpose other than to lengthen the game's runtime. I adored its art and music, which definitely contributed to this genuinely feeling like a lost Final Fantasy game that is finally being released for the first time. It absolutely blows my mind that this is mostly a one-person developed project. I also want to note that the developer was really receptive to feedback, as I reached out a few times before creating this review. If you play this for yourself and you run into any bugs or issues, make sure to report those so he can get them taken care of. But this was Starlight Legacy. It's currently available on PC through either Steam or GOG. It's not dated yet for consoles, but ports should be coming later in 2025. So stay tuned to East Asia Soft's social media channels for any information on those releases. This one gets my stamp of approval, and I highly recommend you play this for yourself because I had an absolute blast with it. I appreciate you watching this review and hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments below if you plan on picking up Starlight Legacy for yourself, and I genuinely hope you enjoy it as much as I did. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, but until next time, have a good one.